Whenever there's domestic political discord, why does the Israeli state punish Palestinians? Why is Japan on a path to abandoning the pacifism that is a core aspect of its constitution? And is it possible to have a major sporting spectacle without widespread corruption? The Tokyo Olympics bribery investigation provides some pointers, and sports writer Sharda Ogra will be joining our correspondents who we will debrief today to fill in the rest of the details on this episode of your favorite news show, The Daily Debrief. We're coming to you from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi, as always. And our first story today is that it was business as usual in an early morning raid for the Israeli military, which hit 158 targets in Gaza, all supposedly sites held by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In this so-called series of targeted strikes, health officials and news reports tell us at least 27 Palestinians have been killed, including women and children. Over 70 are injured. The head of the Islamic Jihad's missile unit has been killed in the strikes, of course. That has been confirmed. But the brushing aside of civilian deaths as mere collateral damage is a shocking reminder of the impunity with which Israeli forces operate. Abdul, tell us a little bit about the pretext on the Israeli side for these raids, and has any justification or even acknowledgement been offered for the quite significant loss of civilian life?
Could not find any reference to Israelis expressing any remorse to what has happened to particularly the children. A lot of children have died. If you see, most of the Israelis claim that it was basically an attempt to, quote unquote, eliminate the Islamic Jihad fighters. If you see the result, majority of the people who have died are either women or children. So it seems, and they are calling it collateral. There is no reference to any regret from their side, and that is, I think, that is nothing new. This has been
standard
standard operating operation of the Israeli armed forces. If you see today's Netanyahu's statement, yesterday's Netanyahu's statement claiming that it is Israel which will decide whether this round of attacks on Gaza will, how long it will go, when will it stop, and so on and so forth. It seems that there is a complete lack of any concern when it comes to the life of the citizens, which is basically the common innocent citizens of Palestine, which are harmed, killed in these attacks. So, yeah, that is one. The second thing, if you see this particular operation, it seems, as it is portrayed in the Israeli media, is basically an attempt to again divert the attention away from what is happening in Israel for many months now. The so-called pro-democracy demonstrations in Israel, and for that, as we said earlier, this is a standard procedure which Israelis has adopted. Whenever there is a trouble inside Israel's polity, they basically punish the Palestinians, whether it is Gaza or West Bank, and this is exactly what is happening at this moment. And of course, if this is happening with the clear knowledge that this is objective, of course, you can't expect them to express any remorse or any regret for the loss of the common Palestinian life.
It's also, Abdul, 1 year since the killing of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh while reporting in Jenin in the occupied territory. And not much movement on that front either, despite it seems now common knowledge of how she was killed.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, if you see, knowing very well that even of course, the Israelis will never take any action. That has been a record against their personnel involved in killing journalists. Various reports, a report published by International Committee for the Protection of Journalists a few days back, talks about 20 journalists being killed by Israeli forces in the last 20 years. None of those killings have been seriously investigated. Even if there were, in some cases, when there were investigations, none of those investigations have come to any conclusion. And no, not a single Israeli security personnel has been found, or even
Held
charged,
responsible,
held
convicted, charged.
responsible,
Yeah.
yeah, for those crimes. So, of course, no one expects at this moment that Israel will, on its own, do something about the killers of Shirin Abu Akleh last year. Even the US, Shirin Abu Akleh was a citizen of the United States. Even the US has tried to basically give clean cheat to the Israeli security forces. In fact, after a lot of pressure created by the human rights organizations, her family, and others, they did constitute an inquiry, FBI inquiry in last November, but that has also not progressed much. At least there is no information in public about what is the situation, what is the condition, where that investigation is leading, if at all it is moving. And if all these groups, her family, Al Jazeera, which was the employer, and Palestinian Authority have together moved to International Criminal Court, asking them to investigate and do something about it. And even after a year, nothing has happened on that front either. So if you see altogether, it seems that as if the Israel's impunity is a kind of something which no one, whether it is the US or whether it is International Criminal Court or any other agency, is willing to, in fact, question and ask it's for accountability. So even if the human rights groups and the groups which basically represent the interest of the journalists have claimed that Israel should be held accountable in reports after report, nothing has happened on that front either. But of course, there is always a possibility and always a hope that something will come out. And with that hope, only her family and the other groups, in particular the Palestinian Authority and the other human rights groups, have been consistent and persistent about pursuing the case, and that is still going on.
All right. Thank you, Abdul, for those updates and your time today. Next up, North Korea's foreign ministry has reacted strongly to moves from Japan indicative of the government's desire to join the recently announced nuclear consultative group, which includes already South Korea and the United States, saying that this benignly named military alliance, if Japan were to enter, would lead to further instability in the region. The nuclear consultative group was announced as part of the so-called Washington Declaration that was made during the visit of South Korean leader Yoon Suk-yeol to the United States earlier. Yoon has said that the declaration includes an upgrade in the relations between the two countries, the US and South Korea that is, and also that it does not rule out Japan joining the group. Anisha, after almost any conversation about the situation in Palestine, some of the diplomatic nomenclature that is used around the world just seems straight out of a sitcom. Of course, nothing funny about what the US, Korea, and Japan are getting up to. What's the big idea?
Well, so far as we know right now, there is no clear announcement as of yet about what they're going to plan with their upcoming meeting on May 21. But what we know, and like considering the warning that North Korea has given to Japan, there are probably moves made by Japan to get into this consultative group, the nuclear consultative group that South Korea's Yoon and Biden had agreed upon when in Yoon's visit to the United States last month. Now, this group is essentially an attempt to is essentially a part of the sort of deal that Biden and Yoon had agreed upon, which is basically to share certain nuclear capabilities, maybe not full-fledged stationing of nuclear weapons, but like obviously we talked about how there will be nuclear submarines that will be sent to the Korean Peninsula. Apart from that, US and South Korea will be sharing intelligence and will be part of this consultative process on the nuclear weapons system of North Korea, but also whether or not nuclear weapons need to be deployed in the future. Now, the thing is that Japan wants to be part of this as sort of like creating a tripartite alliance in the region. And this is something that North Korea is obviously quite wary of, because as we've talked about in the previous episode where we spoke about Japan's Kishida visiting South Korea and the kind of deals that they're probably going to make. In one of that, there were concerns about how there might be agreements or kind of tacit understanding of probably temporary, at the very least, temporary troop deployment to the Korean Peninsula. So Japan is becoming involved in a conflict that it really did not have any stakes in. In fact, it was the reason why that conflict existed in the first place. If you look at the history of its colonial history as a whole, but there is this now an attempt to also be part of the mess of nuclear proliferation in the region, and Japan wants to be part of it, and that is the issue here.
The North Koreans aren't the only ones that are concerned, of course, by the increasing military cooperation and closeness between all these countries, Anish. China, of course, also has significant say and interests, of course, in the whole scenario, and a lot of it is also positioned in that way. From the Japanese perspective, maybe you can tell us whether some of this is quid pro quo for the US, allowing it to continue to deal with Russia for its energy needs. So in exchange, they're kind of joining the gang in terms of military encirclement vis-a-vis China?
Well, in the case of Japan, what we are seeing, as we've talked about before as well, there is very clear attempt at militarizing, a very clear move towards militarizing itself in the next couple of years, and also undermining its own constitutionally validated pacifism. And that sort of doing away with that sort of pacifism in the long run. So creating, not only legal but also diplomatic loopholes by which it can undermine this pacifism in the long run, if not completely do away with it. And in that pursuit, obviously, US sees a valuable ally, because the conservative government has always been one of those, proper US airstrips in East Asia, which has never wavered away from pro-US policy, foreign policy framework, and that is essentially what is happening right now. So, despite Japan having a certain level of independence in certain foreign policy issues, be it like buying energy supplies from Russia, there is the larger game at play, which is obviously, as you pointed out, the encirclement of China, the military encirclement of China, and also creating an axis around itself in the region, which is something that we see from its recent military documents, defense documents, and plans, where it talks about being the pivot in the Indo-Pacific region. A very kind of harkens back to the whole imperial Japanese period.
Thanks for joining us today. Meanwhile, in Japan, two more convictions have been made in the bribery scandal around the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, which were, of course, held finally in 2021 after a year's delay because of the coronavirus pandemic. Shigeharu Hisamatsu, a 64-year-old former executive at an ad firm called ADK Holdings, as well as his former assistant, Toshiaki Tada, received suspended sentences. They are the latest conviction in an ongoing sort of bribery and corruption scandal that has enveloped several companies, including leading ad agencies, as well as other companies in Japan. Neither of these two contested the charges. Meanwhile, Harayuki Takahashi, a sports administrator, is facing a separate set of charges for receiving the bribes, but has so far denied receiving any money or any involvement in this. Shada, today is really one of those typical finallys that they do on television news because I don't know. Firstly, shock and horror. These things happen in the West or the developed world as well. It's not only Asian and African sports administrators that take bribes. What's going on?
In Japan, imagine in Japan, the home of efficiency and punctuality. And I think maybe it's just something that is there around these big games. You can't help yourself. You have to accept a bribe or give one. There's some contract that has to be, something has to come up. I think it's just the whole Olympism of contracts and, sort of building and infrastructure and roads and all the stuff that they say the Olympics gives to a city, it actually gives to many other people along the way.
Yeah, and actually takes from the city, at least from the city's taxpayers, the city's public money in that sense also. But so you brought up Olympism. I don't know whether it was a pun in that sense, but the Olympic movement tries to portray itself as this upholder of good values. Moral high ground always. Of course, in the context of the current war and many other cases, we've seen the hypocrisy also come out of the Olympic movement. Shada, as someone who has been covering sport across for some time, what do you make of the current challenges that the Olympic movement and the Olympic family, as they call it, is facing at present?
I think the challenge they're facing is of scale and of sustainability. Fundamentally, how long do they do this? Where you have, it looks like that they're going to scale down. You're seeing it in football where various countries are sort of saying we're going to bid and host together. It's not going to be just one country, and you got all kinds of permutations and combinations, including I think Saudi Arabia and not Israel, but something that's Greece. Yeah. So. So I think that's their big challenge. There is a lot of stuff that the Olympic movement that is genuinely done in a beneficial way. So all the sort of things they do about mental health and safeguarding female athletes and all the rest of it is great. But the moment it comes to hosting and the moment it comes to sort of actually putting up the big show, which is where the Olympics gets all its funding and its revenues from, then all the sort of things just kind of go to pieces. We must remember that India has ambitions to host the Olympics in the next decade in Ahmedabad. So you're thinking immediately building contracts. Immediately you're thinking building contracts and you're thinking all kinds of cutbacks and whatever swipes and the rest of it. And the story about the main advertising agency for the Tokyo Olympics being involved in this bribery scandal, and I mean full credit to Japan. It's taken them only 2 years to get the thing to the end of the line of saying that okay, we're going to give you punishment, but remember, no one's going to jail. Nobody is going to jail for this.
Yeah. So in that sense, of course, it reinforces the message that white collar criminals are kind of good to go. It's just how the system works, and there are people like us, and so there are sentences that have been handed out, like you're rightly saying, 2 more convictions, but suspended sentences again. So no one going to jail. Sapporo's had interest in hosting the 2030 Winter Games. Now they have said no, but essentially, what you're saying, what you pointed out also, is that this comes down to how the IOC finds its money, how it's funded, and a lot of that has to do with these sponsors, many of whom are local companies, of course. Like there's a suit maker and a soft toy maker in all of this. This idea that the Olympic movement is meant to propagate sport around the world. Also, it's finding it, it finds most of its push towards raising money and making the next Olympic Games bigger. How is everything is the greatest ever. So how do you balance these things out?
it's very tough because of the fact that all your costing has gone up. Everything, your media rights are worth so much. NBC, why are the Olympics as successful and as rich and wealthy? Because a lot of their media rights money comes from NBC, which is America, which is the all-powerful dollar. But the impact that has on the host cities and the host countries where it's being held, those are sort of civic expenses and burdens that the IOC doesn't have to take. They can just pack up their tent and leave. And I think that's where the local cities, I don't think in India we'll be able to protest if we wanted to host the Olympics. We'll all be screaming, but no one's listening. But I think maybe in a place like Sapporo or in countries, I think there was a canton in Switzerland where something of this kind had been done, and they said, no way, we are not doing this. So where citizens have the freedom to say we don't want this, then they can, then they definitely can make a difference, like you're seeing in the case of Sapporo, and particularly in Japan, where you've had natural disasters take place in the last, say, a decent amount of time. They've been there, and there is all this issue of how much is too much, what is excess, why are we doing all this, what is the weight on what is our carbon footprint when you're doing this kind of thing. France is saying that the next the Paris Olympics is going to try and be this green Olympics. So there's so much of this going on, and there has to be a way of scaling it down or diversifying it so that the financial load and the civic load is much less. I mean, Athens Olympics it was a great Olympics, but what happened afterwards, we all know. For 15 days of that fun that all of us had, it was the first Olympics happened to. I mean, the poor country had to suffer.
Yeah. All right, Shada, we will, I think, at some point next time we have you on, talk a bit more about climate change and the kind of impact that sport or the relationship between sport and that. But thank you very much for that today. It was fun chatting to you as always.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Siddhant. Thank you.
That's all we have on this episode of the Daily Debrief. From Shada, myself, and the entire team here at People's Dispatch, thank you very much for watching. Please do like, share, and subscribe. And also give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice for regular updates on all of the work we do. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.